Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, it's time to take your questions, and we've got most of them on Bluesky this week. First one from Michael Mitchell, who asks, in hindsight, what should Poilievre have done to secure the NDP's cooperation in December for the no confidence vote? Is Pierre ultimately at fault for not getting Singh on board? In hindsight, probably. I think he thought that by trying to intimidate Singh and trying to bully him into, saying that he was Trudeau's, he was shackled to Trudeau and Trudeau's unpopularity, that he would somehow want to, try and call that vote early to try and distance himself. And that's why we had the strategy about, it's all about his pension. It's, things like that. And Poilievre is more, that's how he conceives of things, is more in this kind of bullying tactic as opposed to trying to work together and secure cooperation. So in that respect, there was that. I just, on the other hand, don't know what he could have offered Singh in terms of anything that would have made Singh more agreeable to try and pull the plug early. I don't know that, because you have to remember as well that the NDP's polling numbers were not rising as the Liberals were tanking. Theirs had stayed pretty solid where they were. So it wasn't like that the NDP thought that by going early they could pick up a whole bunch of Liberal seats. The polls just weren't showing that, and I'm sure they probably had internals saying that same thing as well. So again, I'm just not sure what Poilievre could have offered Singh that would have induced him to try and pull the plug early. And he tried his bullying tactic. That didn't work. And the fact that Poilievre spent all those months just absolutely denigrating the NDP, and what that wound up doing was not keeping the NDP's vote high enough to eat into the Liberals' vote, and that ultimately was what got the Liberals almost to the majority line. So lots of calculations there to think about, but yeah, it's one of those interesting things to kind of look about in hindsight. Our next question is from Daryl Mast, who asks, do we all owe David Orchard an apology? Probably. For those of you who don't remember, David Orchard was one of the progressive conservative federal organizers who, in the leadership after Joe Clark resigned the second time, so this would have been when Peter MacKay won that leadership, and he won that leadership by entering into agreement with David Orchard, and said, and absolutely swore he was never going to pursue talks with Stephen Harper and the party that I'm trying to remember. It was the Alliance Party, I think it was at the time, and swore that up and down that he was not going to enter into talks with Stephen Harper, and that's what secured his David Orchard's support for Peter MacKay's leadership. A week later, Peter MacKay starts having conversations with Stephen Harper. One thing leads to another. The merger happened, but it was really more of a hostile takeover. And the rest is history. So, we probably do owe David Orchard an apology, but these are the things that happen in history. And I think the Conservatives might finally be having a reckoning about this particular shotgun marriage that they are in terms of their voter coalition, and why it hasn't been working for them post Harper. So who knows where that's going to go, but these are things that are certainly up for discussion. Next one is from Luke Bezaire, who asks, I read your book, Unbroken Machine, and where you discuss electoral reform, first past the post, ranked ballot, PR. Has your opinion changed on any of it? What about a ranked ballot where half of your vote permanently stays with your first choice, and every time your candidate is out, only half of your remaining choice gets transferred to your next choice? So has my opinion changed? Not really. I think the thing with electoral reform is that you just trade one set of problems for a different set of problems, and you don't really come out ahead in the end. So kind of better to stick with the devil you know. Also, the notion that different voting systems would mean that you're not strategically voting anymore, which is not actually true. You just vote strategically in a different way. Ranked ballot being an example in Australia, where you have candidates who say rank us first and then rank so and so second and so third, because they've got their own internals on how they figure that math is going to work for them. So strategic voting happens there anyway. A ranked ballot where you're doing your half your vote and then other half, I think that it boils down to the fundamental problem of when you need to find ways to justify doing funny math in order to get a vote over the 50% threshold rather than just a plurality. You're creating a situation where you're not accurately reflecting what the mood of the voters is. And that's one of the things I think is the strength of the current, single member plurality system, is that you get an accurate representation. You may not get over 50%, you do get the plurality, but in your riding what the distribution of those votes looks like, and that gives you a sense of the strength or lack thereof of the mandate you get from your electors or your constituents, and also can in some cases strive to make either you to work harder to get more of those, or your competitors for the next time around to know what kind of a threshold they need to meet. And we saw in the riding of Carleton where you had someone who worked that riding for 2 years because he knew what the thresholds were and how to get over them, and he did it. So I think that's one of the strengths of our system, is that it gives you that kind of ability to know what you're working with. And whereas if you are redistributing votes in order to reach an artificial 50% threshold, then you lose that kind of thinking about how your riding it works or looks, or the makeup of your vote share. So I think that's something that is valuable that people should think about. Another question on Bluesky from Dominic Joseph, who asks, wondering how millions of people voted for a party that spent years focused on disinformation, bullying, and obstruction of Parliament's work. Is it that people don't know the disinformation, bullying, and obstruction, or don't care, or ... Little of both. I do wish I had some more, psychic insight into what some people are thinking in terms of their voting calculations. But yes, there is a certain amount of people don't understand the disinformation, the lying, the bullying, that they just see it as politics as usual, because we've kind of made things so toxic in so many ways that people just start seeing that as normal, or if not normal, they're just desensitized to it. And it just becomes part of the game. And so they don't think about, it in that way. We're seeing a lot of studies in places like the US right now, where you've got the Republicans who are like destroying the system, and you have people justifying is that, well, the Democrats do it when they're in office, so it's fine, even though the Democrats really didn't do that when they were in office. But they have become, they've been told essentially, or they have come to believe that everyone is doing it, so therefore Trump doing it is not bad because everyone does it. Everyone doesn't do it, but this is kind of what's kind of been normalized in how things are described, and I think that's part of it. But you also just have voters for whom they have different calculations. They believe the liberals are spendthrifts who are destroying the economy and so on, in spite of evidence to the contrary, and that there are different external factors and so on. And there are people who will believe, who want to believe what they are being told by their preferred party, even if it's not true. So there's that psychological bias in there as well. But yeah, it's a combination of factors. And I will also point to, this is part of the problem with the egregious both sidesing in the media. Is that we say this side says this side says that, you decide, and that doesn't necessarily tell you what is actually true, because it allows you to confirm your priors, and or to dismiss a third party who says that it's not true. But because you've just both sides the framing, it allows you to confirm your priors and dismiss an expert, because you can say that they're just biased and so on. And we as a whole have done ourselves a disservice by letting this be the dominant media discourse or the dominant media framing, because we have seen that parties have realized they can get away with lying because it will just be both sides. And so that's part of it as well. So when people hear about the lying and the obstruction and so on, it gets both sides, and then they don't necessarily understand entirely what has happened or why things have happened. And it also feeds into the politics as usual framework, because everything becomes squabbling, particularly in how a lot of it is described in media. So there's that problem as well. And yeah, I think it leads to particularly problematic outcomes, and encourages parties to behave in egregious and outrageous ways because they know that they can get away with it because of how the media framing of all of this works. So that's kind of, I think, one of the aspects we need to think about in how people justify voting for these things, despite what they are. And so, yeah, those are things that we kind of collectively as a democratic society need to really start thinking about, because as we're seeing south of the border, when this kind of thing starts being justified and normalized, you suddenly have an authoritarian state. And that's not a very good thing. And so we should try and avoid that. So yeah, thanks for that. All right, and our last question is over on Twitter, where Crystal Decanter, aka Brett Bart Muse, asks, are you aware of the proposed Canadian Snowbird Act in the US? Maybe 3 GOP reps with midterm concerns responding to their constituents' needs for Canadians, and possibly more, as the UN ambassador's job wasn't in the end for Elise Stefanik. Your thoughts? I have no thoughts as to the actual political calculations of those 3 representatives, because I just cannot with American politics. I've got enough on my plate with Canada. But what I will say is that the act itself is just part of this same thing we're seeing with all these Americans who just can't understand why Canadians don't want to come there anymore. It's a real mystery. And simply letting visas go for longer doesn't actually deal with the problems as to why Canadians aren't there anymore. And also, extending the visa period for Canadian snowbirds also doesn't change the fact that you still need to be in Canada for 6 months for your healthcare to continue. So being in the States for, I think they want to extend it for 240 days or something like that, doesn't help snowbirds with that particular problem either, even if they were fine with all of the other stuff going on in the US. But I think this is mostly just a continuation of all these Americans who just can't figure out why Canadians don't want to go there anymore. So anyway, yeah, it's a real mystery there. But yeah, I can't give you any commentary on the politics side of that because I don't do American politics in that regard. But yeah, I do think that the act itself is kind of a flawed concept because the what good is a visa extension if you've got ICE agents who are arresting and throwing people in concentration camps or gulags when they are perfectly legitimate green card holders or even citizens in some cases. So, yeah. And that's everything for this week. Thank you for all of your questions. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.